The Brian Mudd Show is on News Radio 610 WIOD.
This time last week, you kind of had three things that were going on in the financial markets. You had the consensus that the COVID-19 variants wouldn't be showstoppers, that earnings would be awesome, and inflation would be temporary. And now, at least two of those three, a lot of folks that are wondering, maybe it's not all that. Maybe it's not all that. One of those that we referenced there, the virus itself. And that takes us, Todd Furniss, joining us once again, author of the 60% Solution, Rethinking Healthcare. Now, Todd, relative to the virus and the summer surge in cases we're suddenly seeing, I'm curious to get your thoughts on something. It actually ties into some recent Gallup polling that showed the divergence in trust in science between Democrats and Republicans. What do you make of breakthrough cases and transparency by the CDC and the government generally at this point?
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me. I think there are a lot of questions embedded in the survey that are not necessarily asked, but also very interesting. But I think that generally it's fair to say that the distinction comes between Republicans and Democrats in their faith in institutions, and that is spoken to greatly when it comes to the output of those polls, which said that Republicans generally trust science, and they use the word science, which I thought was interesting, less than they did, a few years ago. And what I think is more interesting about that is that they trust science less, or they trust scientists less.
There you go.
And that's another question, I think, for exploration, because I think that we've heard so many curious things come from research physicians and others, and they haven't been consistent in the recommendations. Could be because they don't have all the information they need, but also could be because they've got a political agenda. And I think that's where people are getting really nervous, is when politics overtakes the empirical science itself.
Well, and there you go. And so to that point, the World Health Organization back on January the 14th of 2020 tweeted out, hey, this whole virus that became known as COVID-19, it's not communicable in Wuhan, China. Nothing to see here, folks. And we know that colored the response of the entire world. There's a good chance the pandemic wouldn't have played out the way that it did had it not been for the World Health Organization lying and covering for China. So, yes, if you're not skeptical of the World Health Organization, the problem is with you. You have one Dr. Anthony Fauci, who not only took hook, line, sinker, whatever the WHO was throwing out there back then, but also has come up with his own weird flip-flops. It was interesting. Over the weekend, our former Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, admitted as much, with some of the mistakes that were made with mask policy and the communication of it originally. Are we at a point to where you have people that are critical thinkers and people that are lemmings? Critical thinkers that will take a look at the information, consider the source, and figure out what it means to them, and lemmings that just sit there and follow in a linear path whatever the next line is by the federal government and the scientists that you're referring to.
Well, and you're absolutely right, and I love those terms because they're so properly descriptive of what's going on in culture today. The thing that I worry about as a step beyond that, which is very concerning, is what's known as the ad hominem attacks if you don't follow and agree with what the party line is, or meaning what the government line is. So an ad hominem attack, as you know, is when you attack the person, not the argument. So you're crazy if you don't believe that X. And when you have that, you can't have rational discussion, and you can't have, as I have named my podcast, you can't have civil discourse. You can't have a genuine exchange of ideas. And so if you kind of add these things up, it's really a dangerous situation, because now you say, well, we're going to believe the scientist over the science. We're going to believe the institutions who are not elected and you don't have anything to do with, meaning you can't control them or influence them. You're really less and less able to help yourself by going through the elected process and through government. And you're vilified. You may have to be a bad person if you don't buy into whatever the government statements are. So it avoids any ability to do critical thinking and to explore for yourself what's really going on.
It's a really important point. And, as we take a look at the way things are disseminated, we know so often in news media, and this can be true even of pollsters like Gallup, to where they're positioned to make it look like one thing when in reality they're quite the other. And then you reference unelected officials. Here we have the CDC. So literally in the 11th hour, in the final 10 minutes, you had the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta on Saturday night issue a stay against the federal judge's issuance of guidance that would have ended the CDC's unconstitutional conditional sale and no sale orders yesterday. So instead, that the case is going to be heard. The cruise industry is still in who knows whereville, and unelected bureaucrats in Atlanta are determining what the policy for cruising in the United States of America is. It's an interesting time we live in, but I appreciate your time and your analysis on these issues.
No, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on it. I think they're critical issues, and they're so dramatically informing our culture right now. And another output of this, for example, is young people believing that the risk is over 10 times as great as it actually is. So we're creating a culture of fear, and people are withdrawing, feeling isolated. It's leading to mental health issues. It's really a bad problem.
Well, and as I like to say, two sides to stories and one side of facts. Todd Furniss, the author of the 60% Solution, Rethinking Healthcare,